Welcome to Work from the Inside Out, a podcast that highlights real-life stories, practical strategies, and best practices for transitioning your career from unhappiness and dissatisfaction to fulfillment, meaning, and joy. Now here is your host, career and executive coach, Tammy Guler-Loeb.
Hey everybody, I am so delighted to introduce my guest today, Dr. Chris Johnson. Chris is the founder of Q4 Consulting, where she partners with individuals and organizations to design and implement training programs that access intuition, surface internalized patterns and mindsets, and address roadblocks inherent in change. Through embodied leadership offerings, Chris and her team support professionals at all levels to build the capacity, compassion, and resilience needed to thrive as leaders. With the potent combination of deepened awareness and aligned action, these leaders cultivate generative organizations committed to the well-being of all stakeholders. Chris challenges and supports leaders ready to embark on integrating life and work in sustainable, fulfilling ways. She's committed to extending the transformational work of embodied leadership to those committed to creating the future. When Chris isn't working, you'll find her in the garden, making art, hiking, or skiing the slopes, listening to jazz, or at the Aikido dojo, practicing the art of peace. And might I add, Chris is the author of a really fabulous book that came out recently, The Leadership Pause: Sharpen Your Attention, Deepen Your Presence, and Navigate the Future. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Chris Johnson. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, Tammy, thank you so much for inviting me to share with you and your audience. And I'm really glad to be here. Thanks.
I am really happy to have you here. And we were talking right before I turned on record, and you know I'm gushing over your book. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful piece of work. I know you've put your heart and soul into it, and I think there's tremendous learning for anybody who is looking towards being a leader or wanting to have a leadership presence. It's incredible.
Thank you.
So as you know, Chris, on Work from the Inside Out, we like to start at the beginning and learn about your formative years, or how your early years may or may not have informed where you are today. So take us back to some of those early years and start us there.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, I love your book and the work you do, Work from the Inside Out, because one of the things it's so great what you're doing, because I really do believe that the work of any leader on any career trajectory, the most effective and actually really folks who are really rocket work from the inside out. It's very much an inside job. And so I've been a fan of your work as well in your book in recent times. So in terms of my early years and how it all began, in terms of my trajectory in career path, I grew up on a farm in downstate central Illinois. And it was kind of a gentleman's farm, actually. So it wasn't very big as farms go, because my dad also worked another job. He worked in a steel mill for a while when we started out. Yeah. But probably so it was a great place to grow up, outside in the country, lots of fresh air, all that sort of thing. Probably one of the most significant impacts on my person, and certainly on my career trajectory, has to do with who my dad is and who my mom and dad were together. So my dad was the oldest of four country boys, but he had a really severe stutter. It was really difficult to be in conversation with him because he had such a hard time talking. And in those days, when he was in school and later in high school, and even today, we still see it, that people who suffer from a speech impediment are often kind of thrown in with folks who are mentally deficient or not very smart.
Yeah.
And so, to my father's credit, he decided early on, because he was in fact a smart guy, that he wasn't going to live under that kind of stereotype. And he was a little counterphobic. He's like, no, that's really not who I am. And he became the captain of the football team and the student council and class president and all of that. He was a really amiable guy, and folks really enjoyed him. And so by the time I came on the scene, my parents are pretty young, and dad stutters. Mom loved him anyway. But he found out early that he didn't stutter so much when he drank. And so what happened is the alcohol would loosen kind of the musculature around his jaw and throat, and he could actually be the great storyteller that he was. He was a great storyteller. And this worked for them until it didn't, because eventually the alcohol had its own set of problems. And there was lots and lots of fighting between my parents growing up. So I think that all of that formed some of my early thoughts around what later became my career, which is as a kid, I remember sitting, Tammy, listening to them fight and thinking, there surely has to be another way that people can get along with each other. This is just not okay. Because it was scary as a kid. It wasn't, it wasn't violent, like it wasn't a domestic violence situation, but just lots of loud noises and yelling. So that was kind of the early basis of me thinking, I've got to figure out how to help people do this a different way. That was the beginning.
Wow. How young were you when you remember starting to have even these thoughts of, gee, there's got to be another way to do that?
Yeah, round about the time you're in fifth grade, right? Around that developmental stage of fifth and grade-ish, right there.
Pubescent or
yeah. Well, when all of our cognitive capacities come on and we can think beyond ourselves, our little selves, and like, oh, there are other people in my class and they have parents. I wonder what their parents are like. And you start like noticing, like, what are my parents like? It was around about then. It was like, okay, something's got to give here. But of course, as a kid, you don't know exactly what that means.
Right. So you just do that. Your awareness is expanding and you're starting to think, maybe not everybody's parents are like this, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And so you started to think that way. So take us forward from there. It sounds like that must have been the dynamic that went on through high school and all that.
Yeah, it definitely did. And I do remember one of my best buddies in high school going to her house for the first time, and they just had a whole different dynamic and people weren't yelling at the table. And it was like, okay, there's something different here. Yeah. But I've always had a sense of my heart. I really care about working with people, and I enjoy having really good conversations and supporting others. So all of that continued through high school and college. And I had thought I wanted to be, another story that fits here is because we were out in the country and because there was lots of fighting. There was, we went to a farm auction one summer, and there was a set of encyclopedias that this farmer family was selling, along with all big, farm machinery kind of thing and household goods. And I begged to have this set of encyclopedias. And so we got this set of encyclopedias. It was old even by that time, right? But it landed in my sister's closet on the floor. And I would go into her closet, and I was starting to look up like therapists like Freud and Jung and all of those people, just because it was like, I have to find somebody ought to know how to work with these people and get people to have conversations. And
that's amazing.
Yeah, that started the path, and the little nerd like in junior high. But that love of psychology and how people work together, how people think, how people make sense of the world, all of that was really, and still is, very intriguing to me. I really am fascinated by how people work and how we make sense and how we do it together.
Wow. Yeah. So you had that interest early on. And I love that. I love that image of you, sitting like and going through the encyclopedias. That just, I love that.
Yep.
So did you leave home to go to school after high school, or what was your life like once you had a little more distance from that situation?
Yeah, I went to a small liberal arts school, and I both loved being away. I was really ready to go when it was time to go, and pursued a degree in psychology and got really active and involved on the college campus. I was a resident advisor, an RA on the campus, and got involved in leadership there. And by the time I graduated, I had had a number of really great experiences. I had been a peer counselor. I had done the RA thing in college. And I thought I would go to graduate school in psychology, which ultimately I did, but I didn't right away. I went to school and I got my master's in social work. And partly that was because I was so interested in working in communities to bring about greater community collaboration. There was that. But also, I didn't have the confidence that some of my colleagues in college had. And most of the ones that I knew who were going on to graduate school were getting into Ivy League graduate schools. And I was like, I don't know if I have it. I don't know if I'm cut out for that kind of thing. So I went to get my social work degree, and then I worked in the community for the next 8 years or so before I ended up going back to school. And I did get my doctorate for sure in psychology.
Well, tell us a little bit about the work you did those 8 years. I'm curious what that looked like.
Yeah. So during that time, I worked for a community mental health agency that was in a largely Black and Hispanic community, although there were some white folks as well, and really worked on the team to support kids in particular and their families working together. So did some community projects with the schools through that work that I did. I also worked at a local hospital where I would do evaluations for families with kids in the hospital. And then it wasn't too long, probably 6 years into that, I decided I wanted to do a deeper dive into working with family systems. And I went to Northwestern University. They had a program at that time that was just starting. It was the Family Institute of Chicago. It later became the Family Institute at Northwestern University. And now they have an accredited 4-year a PsyD program and a master's program. But at that time, it was a certificate program in family systems. And so I went and did that and started really working a lot more intensively with families. And that's where I found my first real mentor, Don Catherall. And Don himself is a psychologist who has an interesting story, but he was a Vietnam vet. And so around about the time I got to know him, I was about 1.5 years into that 2-year certificate program in family systems therapy, that my sister was living in Chicago. She had graduated college, was living in the city, not too far from me, about 7 or 8 blocks. And she was, an intruder came one night and assaulted her, pretty severe sexual assault. And so right from that moment, my career took a dogleg, and I really zeroed in on applying all my skills and experience with family systems working in this space of trauma. So then I spent the next 20 plus years working with severe and intense trauma, PTSD, helping individuals and their families cope with the aftermath and then heal from severe trauma.
Wow. That had got to be life-changing.
It was.
Thank goodness you were right there near her.
I was. And it was, it's one of the moments of pause that really turned things around for me. So earlier, in those early 6 years, I had started already to think about, I really want to work inside business. And so
Oh, really?
I started working in an employee assistance program. And then I became the manager of that program, where we were helping people in the workplace get the mental health services that they needed. And I started doing trainings and seeing people clinically. So I was already doing that when my sister was assaulted. But part of doing that first bit, I was called by a big bank in downtown Chicago and asked to come and facilitate some stress management classes for their staff.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in the process of doing that, it was August, it was hot, really sultry hot here in Chicago.
Yeah.
And I was in my apartment and I developed really itchy, red, blotchy places on my lower legs. And I started scratching in the middle of the night. And after a couple of weeks of this, as I was preparing to teach this stress management class, I finally went to the doctor. And she said, we're going to run some tests on you. You must be allergic to something. And I could think of nothing. No new detergent. I hadn't been hiking. I didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
And so I went back for the results of those tests. And she said, well, the good news is you are not actually allergic to anything. And the not so great news is that you have a severe case of contact dermatitis, and we can work with that. And so I thought, well, that was cool. And then she laid this in. She said, what really is going on is you have a chronic case of stress. I'm going to refer you to a stress management class. And I was just I was furious. I'm like, this cannot be. I'm going to teach this class.
Yeah.
And here she's giving me this diagnosis. And I was convinced she was wrong. I took the Benadryl. I got better, but she got me thinking.
Yeah.
And that was what I credit to be one of my first big pauses, because she's like, you're really more stressed than you know, and your body's taking the hit. And so I was kind of in that space then when the second situation with my sister. So within about a year, both of those things happened. So my love of working with people in community, in organizations, and then the trauma work, both of those things were pivotal moments of pause, and then also of how I envisioned my work, literally from the inside out. And it didn't take too long. I did go back and teach more stress management, not in the typical, you have to manage stress and kind of get it to work. But I discovered John Kabat-Zinn's work and the practices of mindfulness by then. And so it was like, there are different ways to work with stress than just trying to manage it. You could actually develop some resilience. You could transform the stress.
Maybe even prevent some of it.
Yes. Well, prevent it by becoming more resilient.
Right.
In bouncing back, right?
Right. I was just curious, this is more my own curiosity than probably what anyone else cares about, but when you were taking the family systems certification, was that Virginia Satir's work?
Oh, yeah, very much Virginia Satir, internal family systems, Salvador Minuchin, all kinds of. Yeah.
I was just listening to you talk about your early years in college and your decision to go for the MSW versus going the whole master's PhD route initially, the academic psychology route. And I'm thinking, she sounds just like me.
Was that your pathway?
That was very similar to what I did. Although I ended up not going for the MSW, but I considered it very seriously. But I did go into community mental health work. So there's some real similarities in terms of some of the things you're talking about. And I feel like I have a really good picture of what you were doing. And I was, and I did study family systems. And I'm just having this real vivid picture of the way in which you navigated those early years of your career and how I can see how those things evolved and how your own personal experiences were translating into professional interests as well, and how that was so compelling to you. And yet it sounds like you were also able to, not just pursuing this because something happened to your sister, but because you could see the bigger picture of how pervasive these kinds of things were.
Yeah.
And that you knew you could do something about it.
That's exactly right. When I was in graduate school for the MSW, I was interested in kids. And so I was interested in, the negative impact of like child abuse and child sexual abuse. What I had learned already, and you may know this yourself, your listeners may not, and that is at that time, the belief, I'll say, about child sexual abuse is that it was one in like 100,000. It wasn't very common at all. And then only to find out literally while I was in school, a new report had come out. It's like 4 out of 5 women and 1 out of 7 males, right? And it's like, wow, this is much more pervasive.
Yeah.
So then I had my sister situation. It was exactly what you said. It was like, you know what, there's a bigger space for me to offer, to speak into and to support others to recover. Yeah.
It sounds like this really was obviously entirely unfortunate situation that your sister went through. Mm-hmm. And that's an understatement. And yet something within you was propelled as a result of that. And so after that, when did you go for the doctoral program? Was that after 8 years later?
Yeah, that was so. So I started my doctoral program when I was 30, and I wasn't sure it was going to be in psychology. I was interested in business. Do I get a business degree? Do I get an IO, industrial org psych degree?
Yeah.
I'd already had statistics a couple times, didn't love it. So I'm like, maybe I'll go back. I'll talk to some people. But it was around about that time. And I figured, I'm 30, I'll be 35, God willing. And so I might as well just do it.
Yeah.
So I did.
Yeah. So, and who knows, you could have gone back and gotten a business degree anyway.
Mm-hmm. I could have. I've thought about that over the years, like, well, maybe I should have done that, but I didn't. And all has worked out well. I have my own business. It's all good.
Yeah. And you went and you got what's called a PsyD. So tell our audience what that is and how that might be somewhat distinct in some ways from a PhD, or how you went about doing that.
Yeah. So prior to 1974, all of the PhD programs in clinical psychology, and of course now there are many other kinds of psychology, but in clinical psychology, all of them were academic and very research-based. And so they didn't really provide or support people to learn the clinical skills.
Yes.
And so in 1974, a group convened to form a different degree called the PSYD or PsyD. And that degree takes all the research that the PhD folks are doing and helps folks apply it in real life situations. So there's a big emphasis on clinical training and supervision, so that what the outcome is that when somebody graduates from the program with the PsyD is that they're very clinically prepared to actually sit with people and listen and look at the dynamics going on in a situation.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so that was a 5-year program?
It was a 5-year program.
And did you do that full time, or were you working while you were doing that?
Yeah. So by that time, I already had a clinical practice as a social worker. I had teamed together with a partner. So I was working what the equivalent would have been about 20 hours a week of clients, which is almost a full caseload for a clinician. Right. And then I was going to school on top of it. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Did I say I'm a workhorse? Did I say that?
No, you did not. We didn't have that in your bio.
No, we didn't.
That in the bio. And Dr. Chris is also a workhorse. And so when you finished the PsyD, did you continue with your clinical practice? How did you take it from there?
Yeah, I continued with the clinical practice, but the mentor that I mentioned earlier, Don Catherall, I went and worked with him in a clinical practice of about 20 psychologists and social workers. And the specific focus, it was called the Phoenix Institute. It no longer exists today, but at that time we had about 20 clinicians around Chicagoland.
Oh.
And we would come together and do supervision together, review cases, et cetera. And I worked with them for, probably 9 years.
Mhm.
And then that practice folded. And then I've been independent and co-sharing space since then. And then, I decided to do some other things, add executive coaching to my training, et cetera.
So the move from, I mean, it sounds like you had an interest in the business side of things all along, but it sounds like most of your work over this time was more clinical and focused on family systems. And were you doing individual work as well?
Yes, I was doing individual work, individual couples and family. And I continued in that. And then around about the turning over from 1999 to 2000, that year I studied with John Kabat-Zinn, who I mentioned earlier, and went into a training program for mindfulness and started incorporating that. A colleague and I did it because so much of what we were seeing was PTSD and anxiety, and mindfulness can really help with those.
Mm-hmm.
So we got some training there and then started offering it to corporate folks in corporate settings, which I really love doing as well. And then fast forward another decade or so, I got really interested in the trauma treatment, EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. And as a result of that interest, which initially I thought was hooey, and I came to find that it's actually very sound and well-researched trauma treatment, I got really interested in the body and how it is that stress holds the body. Now, you thought I would have learned before when I had the contact dermatitis, but I hadn't quite awakened, however, to the impact that stress really has on our whole system and how we can use the body, not just as a transport vehicle or some beautification project, but we can really use the sensations and the wisdom of the body as shortcuts to make progress sooner in recovering from trauma, but also in our day-to-day lives. We can literally reshape ourselves. So early in life, we're all shaped by our first family and where we grew up and how we grew up. But part of the work of the embodiment is beyond talk therapy or conversation, and really helps people drop into like what's going on in the current moment. So between the mindfulness focus, where we're actually helping people be in the moment that we're in and not catapulted out into the future, really learning how to support people to tune into the sensations of the body, to shift and make changes. It's a very radical, I would say radical in all the good ways. Like it's a shortcut. We can get to some changes that are really positive and healing much sooner. And that's with trauma, but that's also with all of us every day.
Yeah, I've heard remarkable things about it from people I know who have done it. And I've heard it described as radical and yet very effective.
Very effective.
So what turned the corner for you? You said when you first heard about it, you were skeptical, but you definitely changed your mind about it.
Well, I said that regarding the EMDR.
Yes.
The EMDR is a trauma treatment that accesses our attention and our psychobiology in a very specific way by moving eyes, which sounds kind of woo-woo.
Yeah.
But what we know is that the way our brain is structured is there's two hemispheres and they have a lot of communication with each other. So when a trauma happens, in some ways, the way we talk about it is it kind of gets lodged in the brain. That's really just a metaphor for what really happens. But I was initially skeptical because I wasn't yet really tuned in at that time to some of the energy work. And I didn't know enough about the psychobiology. So, but I had a colleague that I really trusted that I worked with at the Phoenix Institute. And he said, no, Francine Shapiro, who developed EMDR, she's the real deal. You ought to at least go to an initial training. You need the CEUs anyway, might as well go train. And by the end, so I'm like, okay, I'll do this. And I went in very skeptical and they came out like, oh my gosh, because they actually work with you through it. It's not just an abstract set of concepts. You have to practice. And it was like, wow, I had a couple of experiences like, okay, I'm in, I got to learn more about this. So then I went on a journey to understand that more. And it was that experience of allowing myself to experience something different than I thought I would learn that really opened my eyes to like a whole nother world of how to work with ourselves. And that was it. It was having the experience. So
this is really interesting because you've had these pathways in your career where even though there's this thread from a very young age, an interest in psychology and an interest in helping people, and yet you've done all these different things. You've constantly been learning new things along the way. You've had the pathway of working with individuals, then with families, working in the community, but then taking your work into business environments and corporations. And it sounds like now your work it's still both working privately with individuals and families or couples, and then also working in businesses. Your book, The Leadership Pause, Sharpen Your Attention, Deepen Your Presence, and Navigate the Future. Let's talk about that. That really focuses on leadership, but you've mentioned the word pause several times, and I know that's a through thread as well. So I want to make sure we talk about that because this book is a very rich resource. And I don't mean just for anybody who is looking to run an organization. I think leadership runs through all of us in one way or another. And I can see where this book could be useful to a lot of different people. So tell us, this is actually in page 57 of your book. What exactly is a pause?
Yeah, so a pause, then I'll tell you why I wrote the book. A pause, well, pauses are kind of like breathing. We can breathe like we're going to breathe. You and I are sitting here. We're not thinking about breathing as we have a conversation, but we're in fact breathing. Sometimes we pause like that too. You pause at the red light, you pause in the grocery line, you pause right before you go to bed, brush your teeth, you have a pause. But all of those are kind of not necessarily conscious in our awareness. They just happen. So what I'm talking about with the pause is being very intentional about choosing to pause. And when we do that, it is an interruption of a habituated reaction that we have. So, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but we all have developed habits and strategies for coping with life, whether that's from a trauma perspective or otherwise. And so the pause intentionally interrupts it, a thinking habit, an emotion habit, a way of showing up in the world habit. And by pausing, we do a couple things. We can reduce our stress. We can be here right in the moment. The stress chemicals, if we are stressed, by pausing, those chemicals can dissipate so that we have a clear head. We can know what's important in terms of what we care about. And then we can take the next right action. But the world we live in today, the VUCA world that I talk about in the book, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. It's a military term that's become a part of the business lexicon in the last decade. Absolutely. And it really describes this environment that we're in where everything's kind of constantly changing. Right. So leaders just try to keep up. And by trying to keep up, we end up on this little squirrel cage wheel. Right. And so the pause is really about, can we interrupt that on purpose?
Yeah. And to, it sounds like interrupt that on purpose so that we can get more grounded rather than functioning from this sort of fight or flight response or more reactive place, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that we're not always triggering our adrenaline or,
That's right. That's right. Mm-hmm.
So I'm declaring that your book is for everyone. But I'm imagining that you might have other ideas about who should be reading your book.
Yeah, you know what? I wrote the book for the audience of leaders who are really wanting to live more purposefully in their own leadership and also in the life of their organizations.
Mm-hmm.
But I hold that everybody, as you said, is really a leader. So the mom or the dad who joins the PTO, or there's a church project that you're running, or a nonprofit, all of those have leadership roles and capacities. And for those of us who are inclined, I think we can really cultivate our leadership by, in fact, I think it's imperative that we learn to pause, because once we learn to pause on purpose, we have more access to resources that live within us in terms of resiliency and working with other people. But we have more clarity around why we do what we do. And we've seen this so much with the pandemic. People are really questioning, this whole great resignation, great reset, all of that I'm sure you see all the time.
Yeah.
It's an opportunity people have taken to like, hey, do I really want to do what I've been doing? And the pause will help those folks develop some clarity for themselves about how they want to move.
So there are a number of different ways that people can pause, and there's almost like in some cases it can almost be a progression of different actions or activities or ways of being. Would you say?
Mm-hmm. I would say so.
And I think it's also a way in which the way you describe it in the book, it can be developing certain habits around, the mindfulness habits that you've talked about, but also you created an acronym out of the word scope, space, connection, openness, pace, and energy. And it seems like that gives the reader and someone who's really trying to achieve almost a deeper level of pause, a way of really asking themselves some strategic questions as they want to really take this kind of pause to a deeper place. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So there are momentary pauses, and then there are, like, maybe you plan a pause during your day.
Yeah.
And there are maybe, like, I have a weekend pause. I'm going to go off, all technology or something like that. There are different lengths of pauses. The SCOPE acronym kind of emerged as I was writing, because these are the elements of pause: space, connection, openness, pacing, and energy. And I give examples of clients of mine who really needed to look at one specific area in each of those. One comes to mind whose pace, he was way out ahead of his skis, like a lot of busy entrepreneurs, business types today. And his pace was on. He talked like this really, really fast. And he consistently got feedback that he was abrasive and pushy. And so one of the things I had him do was play with pace. And I taught him some pause practices so that I'm like, let's just play with your pace. What happens if you slow it down? What happens if you speed it up more? And he was able to, he had some light bulb moments like, oh, this is what they're talking about. This is why it's valuable for me to be able to regulate my pace in a different way. So that's one example.
Yeah, it's a great example. I think there's a lot of people who could probably relate to that and see the impact of changing their pace.
Right.
So if people want to learn more about your work or how to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that, Chris?
The best way to do that, there's a couple ways. The first one would be to check out my website, and that's q4-consulting.com. And you could check out what I have going in terms of services. You could also email me, or there's a connection place on the website. You could send me an email and I would get that.
Great.
You could also send me an email at drchris@q4-consulting.com.
Great. We'll have
Yeah.
all of that in the show notes, including your social media. And I know that you're a great communicator in that way. I want to ask you just one more question. And that is, you've made a number of transitions throughout your career, a lot of strategic ones. If you were to give somebody one key piece of advice about if they were considering their next move or their next transition, what might be a key piece of advice you would give them as they're considering what's next for them?
I would say a couple things. I would say pause and be in the discomfort that this transition is requiring, and listen. So anytime we make a transition, so change is external, but the transition is how I integrate it inside. And so you want to sit with the discomfort, I really wanted to do something else, or I'm not real happy here, and let yourself be appropriately uncomfortable in the pause, right? Don't push it away. And
Right.
then out of that, is there a conversation? Listen for, is there a conversation I need to have with someone? Like maybe a Tammy who could give me some advice along the way, or maybe maybe you want to switch fields totally, and you've always wanted to talk to your neighbor down the street who does the thing you think you might like. So
yeah,
that's what I would say.
yeah, I love it. I love it. So pause and be or sit in the discomfort that this transition might be putting in front of me, or listen, is there a conversation I need to have?
Yeah. Because, anytime we make a big change, especially a career change, there's going to be discomfort. And if we think otherwise, then we're fooling ourselves. But it's not all bad. It could be really good, right?
Oh, I think more often than not, it does. We learn something. And usually when we've learned something, we take that forward, and that's a good thing. Well, Chris, this has been wonderful. Your book is called The Leadership Pause. I highly, highly recommend it. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. And I thank you for your time today. It's been great having you on the podcast.
It's been a pleasure to be here, Tammy. And I hope all of your listeners take this to heart, start practicing the pause, and take it into their lives where they're going to go. Yeah?
Yes.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Dr. Chris Johnson. It was so interesting to speak with her and learn about her journey and current professional activities. What is your key takeaway from our interview? If you are interested in any of the resources mentioned in today's podcast, you can find them in the show notes on my website at tammygoulerloeb.com/podcast. Just look for episode 197. Are you anticipating your next professional move? Check out my award-winning book, Work from the Inside Out, Break Through 9 Common Obstacles and Design a Career That Fulfills You. It's available in print and ebook editions through my website, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, independent bookstores, and through your local library. If you were inspired by this episode with Chris, please share it with your friends and colleagues, and please do subscribe so you don't miss next week's show. Remember, subscribing is always free. If you're enjoying the podcast, I'd really appreciate reading your written review on Apple Podcasts. It's easy to find through my website, tammygoulerloeb.com/podcast. Just click on the Apple Podcast button and follow the instructions provided there. You can also help sustain this podcast by buying me a cup of coffee. Just go to buymeacupofcoffee.com/TammyGL. Since I self-fund this podcast, I'd certainly appreciate your support. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, it's never too late or too impossible to increase your sense of fulfillment and satisfaction in your work and other meaningful activities. Let me know how it's going for you. I'd love to hear from you. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Work from the Inside Out podcast. For more information, You can find us at www.workfromtheinsideout.com.